Welcome everybody. It's very lovely to see. There's something about that, seeing people coming in and taking a moment to appreciate everybody making the effort to be here as we take another turn around the sun. So let's start with just sitting for 15 minutes, allowing yourself to just notice wherever you are, and we'll just sit together. Would you like to join me in saying, vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Well, I was just attempting to be bright and bring up my talk, and it's just obliterated everything. So I can either read my talk or I can look at you. So maybe I'll do my talk and imagine everybody sitting there. So welcome back. Welcome back to everybody. It's I imagine for many of us the holiday season has ended and we're all well back into already. I feel like I'm already really deep into 2025, so I don't know if it's the same for other people. And I'm personally not one for making New Year's resolutions. I sort of realized the futility of that for my own particular nature some time ago. And I saw a meme that said something like, we've opened this place, we've made it a gym for 2 weeks, and then after that we'll become a wine bar and cafe, which seemed to me pretty much how many resolutions go. So that's not somewhere that I tend to go to. And some of you may have made resolutions and found them really helpful. But I'm aware that we also chant the Bodhisattva vows, we chant vows. And as Flint and other Buddhist teachers have said, are you going to be led by vow or driven by karma? So I think that this kind of cusp of the year, this time can be a really good time. I mean, any time is a good time. But I think this time of the year can be a really good idea and opportunity to think about what's your vow. And I was really struck some years ago when Flint said, if you want to look at what your vow is, if you want to look at what your vow is, look at how you're living your life. What's your life like right now? Because that's the ongoing enactment of your vow. So I always think that's a really interesting, it's not this thing in the future, it's not this other place, this vow. It's like, what are we doing every day? What are we doing with our lives? So it's, for me, that's just a really intriguing way of thinking about vow. Towards the end of last year, Flint shared with us a beautiful and touching video of his teacher, Blanche, teaching with such insight and vigor and humor in the winter of her days. She was a real embodiment of her vow to relieve suffering. And he talked of the gratitude for all of those whose practice has enabled us to sit here right now, wherever it is we're sitting with our own practice. We're trying to be good ancestors for this very kind of odd, uncertain future. I mean, it's always been uncertain, but we have an odd, uncertain future that we're all leaning into, with all the many changes that are happening in the world around us. And I often have this real deep feeling of gratitude for my teacher, Flint, and all the teachers. And as many of you know, Blanche was one of the driving forces of supporting people to sew traditional Zen garments, the rakusu and the okesa. And I know from talking with Flint and the many things that he said online is, time spent with Blanche in the sewing room was really precious time. And I found something really similar when I was sewing a rakusu. there was something about the practice that really touched me really deeply. And in our local Sangha, the Nothing Missing Sangha in the UK, we listened to talks from our guiding teacher Flint and other teachers. One of the teachers that we listen to in the Zen tradition is someone called Kuan Franz, and he has a Sangha based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's called Thousand Harbours Zen. And just recently, just last year, their temple has become an officially registered Zen temple. And this year, in 2025, Kuan is going to ascend the mountain seat and become the very first abbot of his temple. And he will be, as part of that, he invited all the people in the Sangha to help sew the okesa, which I thought, as something of a control freak, I thought was an incredibly generous offer to ask other people, many of whom he would never have met in person, to help sew the okesa. And I'm personally so grateful for his practice and everything that he's offered through his own dedication and the setting up of the beautiful Thousand Harbours Zen group and the building of their small temple. My deep enjoyment and learning from sewing, that I wanted to support this sewing practice. So I wrote to them to offer, and after some time I was sent two smallish pieces of fabric, a sort of darkish olivey green one and a small thinner, it's kind of slightly opaque, smaller, thinner piece of fabric. And the idea is that you sew these two fabrics together and it will become one of the 33 panels that'll be sewn together to create the okesa. And on paper, the instructions looked relatively simple. You sew them together and it's a very simple running stitch. And the idea is that the running stitch is 0.25 centimeters long and each line is 0.25 centimeters above the previous one, with each top stitch occupying the space left above it. So you make a sort of brick pattern. And I looked at the instructions and I looked at the relatively small size of the fabric and the simplicity of the stitch, and I felt pretty confident about my capacity to do it. And I looked up the word hubris the other day and I thought, yes, that's a pretty good definition. It was so painful. To begin with, I sewed 4 rows, painstakingly, took a long time. I'd practiced on a spare piece of fabric, sewed 4 rows, and as I was sewing, I realized I'd got off to this incredibly wonky start. And the more I was sewing, the more I was realizing it just wasn't remediable. And so I needed to undo it all and work out how to align the fabrics better, and then not start from the edge that I'd started from and to start sewing again. So my very first encounter with it was a sort of several hours of failure. And then after a while, I did begin to get the hang of it a little more. And I love the practice of setting up the sewing and doing it in a really focused way. You know, light the incense, you do your bows, and on this occasion you're also invited to read the 10 excellent merits of the Kasaya. And that was a challenge because it uses language that I'm not particularly familiar with. I could find myself disagreeing with it, which is a rather marvelous thing to do with a chant. But I was also finding myself kind of longing for such a protective garment. So just doing that was a really interesting practice. And from this place of loving it and really wanting to do it, each time I sat down to sew, it has been like seeing my failures made visible. And in IFS terms, if any of you are familiar with that, the kind of legacy burdens I'm sewing into place. Because the task is just to sew in a straight line with each stitch exactly the same length and each row the same distance apart. And I couldn't do it, and I can't do it. Every row has some glitch in it or other, and in trying to accommodate the glitch, the kind of messiness starts rippling down across the lines and through the fabric. And mostly because of the way my system works, I found it very amusing. The trying and the failing all sewn into the fabric, along with my deep intention, also sewn into the fabric. And the initial instructions had also said that there'd probably be enough thread to complete the panel. And as I was sewing, I realized there was going to be like nothing like enough thread. So of course, my first port of call was that I'd been doing it wrong. I'd done it too small, too tight, that I must be creating this particular problem. So it took many breaths and many checking the measurements and rechecking the measurements to realize actually there's just not enough thread. It wasn't my error on that occasion. So, being a good internet shopper, I set out to buy the extra thread that we'd need, and we'd been given the name and the number of the thread. And I'm a really persistent shopper, and it took some time to realize that this particular thread, though it's a brand we get in the UK and in Europe, you can't get that actual number. They can't get the matching thread. So I ended up ordering from Canada. There's a postal strike, that wasn't going to arrive, and then it finally managed to get the right thread from the States. And that's a kind of long tail for a very small piece of fabric, but it's just been such a wonderful practice opportunity. And Master Dogen says at the beginning of the Genjo Koan, which is the koan of our daily life, and he starts it with the statement, when all dharmas are Buddha Dharma. When all dharmas are Buddha Dharma. When we can approach the world as a field of practice, the whole world as a field of practice, one moment at a time. So the way was unfolding, one wonky stitch at a time. And then in the communications with Cohen, he said in an email, you'll see the stitches, they'll see the robe. You'll see the stitches and they'll see the robe. And it really made me think about how much of our lives we live, stitch by stitch, step by step, breath by breath, painful mistake after painful mistake, glory after glory, whatever. And we see and feel all of the stitches and all of the glitches, the ordinary and the marvelous. And we can get really hung up on them and wish we could go back and unpick things or promise ourselves that the next row will be better. And of course, it is, and quite often it isn't. And as Suzuki Roshi said in one of his shorter Dharma talks, the problems you're experiencing now will continue for the rest of your life. And the problems that I've experienced sewing this are continuing. Picking up the fabric that will be sewn together with all the other journeys in practice that have taken place all over the world. These 33 pieces of fabric are all over the world. And from the emails that are coming in the conversations, I can see that every single one is a journey. Every single one is its own Dharma practice for each person doing it. And they'll all go to make a garment that hopefully will support a wonderful practitioner and all of the students that he supports and all of the ongoing unfolding, life, stitch by stitch. And I'm sewing now because of the good ancestors who painstakingly learned this practice to bring it to the West, which didn't start really until 1971 when Eshun Yoshida, a teacher of sewing and the abbess of a temple in Japan, was visiting the United States, and she encouraged Shunryu Suzuki and his assistant Dainin Katagiri to begin the practice at San Francisco Zen Center. And they found themselves at the vanguard of this interest in Zen in America, and Katagiri asked his wife, Tomoe, to learn Nyohei from Yoshida. So she became the first person in the States to learn and teach the hand sewing of robes, and of course with Blanche became the two great matriarchs of American Zen sewing. And now we sew in the UK too. So I just love the way this thread keeps on going. In an article about Tomoe in Tricycle, she talks about her learning from the deep and steady practice of sewing. And I just wanted to quote some of the things that she says, because there's something so beautifully clear and succinct. She said, when asked by a student, "Is there anything to be said for the final stitch?" The last stitch is the same as the first. Just that. The last stitch is the same as the first. It goes on in the article to say, in a sutta service, usually the teacher leads the bows, and as he or she leans forward to start the bow, everyone else follows. When the author was sewing with Tomoe, I could never tell if she was leading the bows or if I was, and I asked her once, and she answered, yes. Isn't that a great answer? Yes. And one student confessed in the middle of sewing practice, sometimes I worry that I'm not good enough to be a Zen priest. And Tomoe replied, yes, forever. Yes, forever. And when asked about what was the most important thing about sewing, she replied, through sewing you learn a lot about the Dharma. Buddha's teaching is not just sewing. One stitch, tiny stitch. When you think about how many yards you will sew, chanting the Buddha's name with every stitch, if you count all the stitches, you say, I cannot do it. But if you do this stitch, one stitch, one stitch, one stitch continuously, you will finish. If you stop, if you quit, even if you're very good at stitching, you will never finish. Just continue. When you continue with the stitching, you will have many problems. Indeed. When you continue with the stitching, you will have many problems. Experience, yes, that's your life. You can learn about oneness just chanting refuge in the Buddha with every stitch and your life. That is Dharma stitching. You can learn about oneness just chanting refuge in the Buddha with every stitch in your life. That is Dharma stitching. So this is my vow for this coming year, to make the next stitch as best I can and know that sometimes it'll be in alignment and sometimes it won't, but to keep stitching anyway and to do it with lightness and love. So we together, we've come back together, and I think of ourselves as stitching this, one stitch at a time. And whether we're doing that with fabric or thread or love or action, our lives are one stitch at a time. And we see the stitch and others see the robe we've made of our time here. So I'm really curious, what are we stitching together right now? And I'd love to know how that is for other people. What are we stitching together? What's your vow? Hi,
Trudy.
Jessica.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was so moving for me in so many ways. And I felt the rise of heat, of frustration, of trying to sew the robe, and the preciousness of the journey. Yeah, just there's so much in there, an entire life. And I say this with tears in my eyes because this morning at Zazen, I was running just a little late, so I grabbed anybody's rakusu, and I go and after the chant, I put it on and I see as I'm putting it on that it's my dear friend Carolyn that passed.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to wear her rakusu today, but I did. And
Perhaps she meant you to wear it.
yes, yeah, to feel her, to feel her intention and her dedication to practice that she sewed, knowing very much that she was going to die, and as a gift for us to be able to wear her rakusu. There just aren't words for my gratitude for that. And so when you said, you'll see every stitch, they'll see the robe, that just flashed right back to, yes, yes.
What what an amazing kind of gift to leave is like just so you're not going to wear it, to know that this thing that is such a deep practice. I mean, if you haven't done the sewing, it's kind of just looks like sewing, but oh man, it's such a thing. And to do that and leave it for people mistakenly, inadvertently put on.
Yeah, yeah, to mistakenly wear that vow.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm just feeling kind of goosebumpy as you're saying it, I can feel the depth of her vow through you.
thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Jan.
Hi, Trudy. Lovely to see you. First time for this year. Um, I just wanted to say though, I'm feeling so moved by Jessica's story, by what happened today. How amazing! What a gift to end up wearing her dear friend's rakusu. Um, just feels so precious.
Mm,
So I felt I was compelled to come forward because we haven't spoken about this cloth,
mm,
and the plan was that Trudy, myself, and Lynn would all sew part of the piece of cloth, and I took over the baton from Trudy just so everybody knows what the plan was, and yeah, I ended up unpicking all my rows, as you know, Trudy, but we've not talked about it. I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the time to try again. But I, I really, I was really struck by how when you do one row and it's full of glitches, is then as you try to compensate for the glitches, then you get more glitches. And I was really aware as I was sewing and so enthralled in that I wasn't conscious of the length of my stitches, and there was also I was confused about the length of the stitch, as you know, and that the sort of I felt quite distressed at not being able to contribute in the end. I felt such a joy that I was going to be part of that and going to be able to contribute. So to have to unpick my stitches, because we came to the conclusion my stitches had gotten too big. And I don't know, I just wanted to talk to you about it because we've not talked about it. I simply posted the piece of fabric onto Lynn and she took up the baton. And I'm not really sure where that's up to now, but I'm really touched by
Can I just pause you a second?
yeah, do.
What makes you think your stitches aren't on it still? Your intention?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
makes you think that?
yeah. This is very true. Yeah,
It's been in your hands. It's had,
yeah. Mm. I really wanted to contribute, and I guess I did. I did.
absolutely.
Many hours, actually. Mm. And maybe there was a sense of sort of shame, really, at the end of it, that I unpicked and hadn't managed to fulfill what I really wholeheartedly wanted to be part of, because I really love Cohen Friends. I love his talks, his teaching. I thought it was a wonderful thing to be offered the opportunity to be part of the CASA.
And you are.
And I am, yeah, and I am. And that I hadn't really thought that I was. I had thought I'd been erased. I had erased myself.
Yeah. Isn't that a painful delusion we do to ourselves when we
Yeah,
think people can't see what we've done?
yeah, yeah.
As if those stitches haven't existed and they have.
Mm, yeah,
And when I send it back, I'll say, our three pairs of hands carried this.
yeah. It feels really important to be sat here honouring the fact that I did contribute. Um, um, as far I'm really aware of another little voice in my head about stop getting upset over a couple of stitches. But
No, though it's important, and you
yeah,
know, I,
yeah,
I, I get the process,
yeah,
and I know the shame I felt about, it being, sorry, excuse my language, so half-assed. It's kind of, it's like, it's
yeah.
not right, it's not perfect, and then,
I know it was
and
so
then
hard.
it's so hard.
And I felt I was following the instructions, and yet it didn't look at all like it was supposed to look. And maybe that's what life is
What a teaching! I'm
what
following
it is.
the instructions, and it
Yeah,
doesn't look like life's meant to look.
yeah, yeah,
What do I do,
yeah,
So whether I erase it or not, if you unpick it, your stitches are still in that fabric.
yeah, yeah. Mm. Oh, it feels really good to be speaking about it, and thank you for the gift of banishing my delusion.
Well, that would be a marvelous thing.
Yeah, yeah, I feel really quite heartened now that because what was important was my vow
Yeah,
and my intention, and I
absolutely.
really wanted to do it, and it felt, yeah, so important to honour Cohen France.
Absolutely.
That was such a heartfelt feeling that I had. So
So I have it back.
yeah,
Lynn sent it back, and I think Lynn really struggled too.
she,
But I have this week marked out, and I think it'll be done by the weekend.
yeah, I know it needs to be. It needs to go back.
We have to get it
Um,
back. So you
mm,
can't you can't have a robe with patches missing. So a
no,
little
no.
bit of an imperative, but
Yeah,
it's grand. It'll be on
yeah,
its way
mm,
with all of us in.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Trudy. It's been really good to meet you and explore that with you. Thank you.
Great. Hey, Cassie.
Hey, Trudy. It took me 12 years to sew a rakusu. And a lot of that was it just sitting on a shelf in a box high above on this little wardrobe. And um, what a powerful practice sewing is. And just looking at the stitches and watching my mind drift off and come back and drift off and come back and drift off and come back. Um, and the Namu Bitsuku chant.
So, yep.
Yeah. I would try that. And what would play in my head instead was Elton John saying, "I'm still standing." And it would be like,
Wonderfully valid chant.
wonderfully valid. Yeah, tracked. I mean, I knew psychologically exactly why, Elton was with me in that moment, or all those moments, and having the same experience in the first sewing class of I've got this, that makes look at those instructions; they make perfect sense. To the actual doing of it, and that community was required for me. I could not sew on my own. Could not sew on my own. I would, near the end, I would be able to do some of the long lines and stuff like that, but I had so much trepidation with the placing of the pieces and so incredibly wedded to my perfection pedestal. Oh my gosh. And then to like bring up that question into myself of, where else is that pedestal?
Yeah, where else am I trying to get life exactly right?
So every once in a while, I'll land with my intention instead.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the compass point, isn't it? Is like all those other things will play out and keep playing out, whatever venue we're in, whatever activity we're in. But how do we just keep that compass point? My intention is to just, turn up with as much uprightness and grace and dignity and humor can I manage. That's it.
And how beautiful Jan's intention is.
Absolutely. And it's there, I know it's in the
There.
pot.
Yeah, I can feel it across the pond.
Absolutely.
So, a bow to you, Jan. And to all of you here, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cassie. Becky.
Thank you. This has been wonderful because at a certain point I decided that even though the arthritis that's gotten so bad because during my cancer treatment that I wasn't going to be able to sew well, and knowing that that's the point of it. And the other thing is, I can't think of why I want to have a rakusu. But aside from that, everything that I felt from people who were talking about their experience made me want to do the journey.
Yeah.
And I didn't care if I ended up with a rakusu, and I didn't care, if it was perfect or anything, so much as I wanted to join my sisters and brothers in Sangha in the journey because I've listened to some of people's stories and the ones that you've put forward today and so on, and I see how it is, and I have things that I can do that would be a parallel kind of journey, because and so my rakusu would look very different than anybody else's. Now I did think that if I wanted to make one that I could make, I probably could use, rather than the Japanese form, I could use the similar thing that had begun in Buddha's time for people to recognize each other as a follower of Buddha. And I could probably do that fine, you know, stick some rags together in a thing of coffee and have about the right color for that, and you know, so on, and do the best I could, but it wouldn't be. And that I may yet do that. But
And it is that intention, isn't it? It's not, I mean, essentially a rakusu is a deeply useless piece of fabric. You know, we only wear it at certain times. It has, people have been posting them to the States, to Hawaii, and at the post office they say, "What's the value of this?" And the people are like, you know, pence and invaluable. It's bits of fabric. It's got no value, and it's been a totally valuable journey. So, you know, I would say, you know, your life is an expression of you anyway, Becky.
yes, yes, it is. And every way that I can feel the journey of us, not just mine, the richer I am. And so, but you know, in terms of rakusu per se, I don't know.
Oh,
Someday it may be just right for me to pursue, and meanwhile, I appreciate everything everybody shares about their experience.
and you offer your own stitches into this fabric that we make. It's nothing to do with material.
We're an amazing textile.
Yeah, thank you. Mary. Mary has laryngitis and can't unmute.
I don't know if I can speak, but I've managed to unmute the button. My voice is coming back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It seems a bit ridiculous to come up when I can't speak, but it's also very fitting. While you were talking, I was thinking about all the things I haven't done. Some things I haven't done because I was too ill to do them. Some things I had to stop doing because they were too much. And my rakusu that Lynn ended up sewing for me. And I was thinking about, well, how does my vow manage with all this not doing and saying I can't do it? And then when Jan came up and talked about her not managing the stitches and stopping, I thought, yeah, it's the same thing. And I could see that the intention is the vow. It's not the actual achieving the finished product.
Something settles in you when you say that?
Yeah. Well, it was very lovely seeing that Jan's efforts were still in Cohen Francis' piece of cloth.
and we'll all die with things undone. We'll all leave threads that haven't, you know, manifested, haven't made the thing we wanted to make, but we are all leaving stitches. We all leave something.
And they'll see the robe, not the stitches. I found
Absolutely.
that very moving.
Me too.
So we don't need to focus on the small failed stitches. It's the overall robe that matters.
Mm. And the robe is made of failed stitches. You know, that's the joy of it as well. It's like, and successful ones and really mediocre ones. The whole thing. And we see the robe.
Thank you.
You spoke fine.
It looks like we have Wayne with his hand up, and Francis, I saw your hand up before, but then it went down. If the system did that to you, just please raise your hand again, and we'll get you in there. Or if you change your mind, again, that's fine. And in the meantime, in between time, we'll get Wayne in there.
Yeah.
Well, Trudy, thank you for your very interesting talk. Um, I have always liked to sew. I have a lot of bad stitches, but I, I sew things. I have developed a tremendous amount of tremor because of a hereditary disease I have, and so I'm limited, but I still love darn socks. It's a fun thing to do. But the most wonderful thing I took from your talk is a very deep appreciation for the women in my life, my mother and grandmother and aunts that I think use their needlework of crocheting and knitting and embroidery as a meditative thing in facing the harsh realities of farm life and in some cases not very good marriages. And it was their refuge. It really was their refuge. And my mother left to me a crocheted tablecloth of very fine thread that is for a table for 12, which was how many were in her family of origin. So thank you. Thank you for adding to that appreciation.
Oh, thank you for naming that. That's just so beautiful because I was thinking, as I was talking with people in the States, I was thinking about the patchwork, about the amazing patchwork quilt tradition, and how
Yes,
that's made of, you know, usually old fabrics and often joint endeavor. And yeah, this way
yes.
that we sew things together and
Yeah,
they
wonderful communal get-togethers to piece together a quilt,
absolutely.
which my wife still does.
Mm. So thank you for naming that part
And
of it too. So lovely. Thank you. So I think we shall bring this to a close by saying the four practice principles together. And I would hope that everyone can find ways to live kindly with their poor stitches as well as their lovely creations, because we just all make them. So, caught in the self-centered
it's
dream,
a dream,
only
only suffering.
holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Thank you very much to everyone for coming here and giving precious time to each other. And thanks, Ed, for monitoring, and I'll hand over to Ed now. Thank you.
Huge, huge thanks to you, Trudy. Again, another marvelous time. Thank you so much for your insights in the Dharma. And I just want to remind everybody that Appamada's programs are supported in the facility by your generosity. You can go to the website and appamada.org and contribute in that fashion. And if you'd like to continue for another 30 minutes or so, just stay where you are, put yourself in gallery view, and we shall continue our Sangha community. Thank you, everybody.